This is a panel on energy transition, and it's about energy companies' transition to some extent, but it's also about societal transition. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I've been known in recent years to being a person who sort of encourages acceleration in corporate energy transitions. And I want to blame Stanford for that because like everybody else here, Arun and Yi, I grew up under George Shultz, who's been calling for these transitions for a very long time. But you guys are leading in that way, and your colleagues right now are over in Egypt, and they're trying to figure out how to get back on track, how to be Paris compliant, how the world looks 30 years from now. Net zero, 2050 was the call in Glasgow. You all have published plans, and you've executed, or beginning to execute. Look into the crystal ball and share with us, as we begin this conversation, what it looks like, what the world looks like in 2050, what your contribution is to that, and what you see the energy mix unfolding from here to there. Small question.
Yeah, small question, Alexander. Let me try and have a go. And I thought that Naomi's introduction just now was very helpful in that respect. Nobody knows exactly, of course, what the energy system in 2050 would look like. But I think she was very helpful in sharing the McKinsey outlook. This week or last week, the International Energy Agency published their World Energy Outlook, and they had a net zero perspective. And what I would say is what they have in common is that by and large, or significantly, the energy system will be electrified by then. But at the same time, there'll be significant and material need for molecular fuels. And that will include fossil fuels. And so we're looking at a multimodal, multi-carrier energy system that will be required and net zero by then. We consider ourselves to be a leader in the energy system and the energy space today, and we would want to be that in 2050. As you put it, we have made a net zero 2050 commitment as an energy company, and we're working hard towards realizing that goal, which is challenging, and I'm sure we'll get to debate that. But we think we'll be able to deploy the capabilities and the qualities we have in support of creating that energy system and being a successful company in that respect. And that really requires us to bring to bear all the qualities we have in, if I put it simply, I think innovating at scale. I think that's what companies like TotalEnergies and Shell are very good at, and have proven to be very good at in more than 100 years of being around the energy system. And I think that will be of great value in the 3 decades to come ahead of us.
What does that mix look like, Ladislas?
Well, when you look in the crystal ball, which means you don't know whether that's going to happen or not.
Yeah.
But in a net zero world by 2050, I think if we refer to the IEA, people having thought it over, basically you have electricity including renewable electricity and nuclear, representing something like around 60%. You have all bio fuel, gas, new molecules, let's say, that can represent 20%, and oil and gas 20%. Well, if you take that as benchmark and say, okay, by the way, if you have still oil and gas production, that we will have, and I fully share the view expressed by Harry, in order to get to net zero, you need to have negative emissions. So clearly, in this scenario, I don't know, it's maybe 7 gigatons of CCS or a natural-based solution, but so that you can end up with a net zero. As a multi-energy company and transforming ourselves very much, we do think that, of course, that we are part of the solution. And when we think about ourselves, TotalEnergies in 2050, we could look like a company producing and selling about 50% renewable energy. But here, we are not in nuclear, so that's not exactly the same perimeter. It would be 25% of new molecules, and it would still be 25% of oil and gas with contribution in terms of CCS, I don't know, 50, 100 million tons per year, so that actually we can effectively comply with our ambition to be net zero by 2050, together with society.
So when you say 50% renewables, are you also saying 50% electrification?
Well, when we say in the renewable business, what we want to do is to develop along the chain. Not necessarily in infrastructure, but in producing renewable and actually integrating along the chain, because that's the best way. Actually, you can, you know where you can get some returns. It's critical because we are always criticized, saying, "Oh yeah, but." You don't make the returns in renewable that you can make in other businesses, and we approach it, and that's very important to be profitable, because economy runs with ecology. I mean, if there is no money being made, at the end, the private sector will not engage, and it will be extremely difficult to complete successfully the transition. But you have means, actually, to do it. We are both companies with very large balance sheets, and leverage in this activity is necessary. So we have expertise, and we may come back to offshore wind, which are technologies that we do master quite well, given our experience in offshore methane activities. So at the end, by leveraging, by developing some models where also you dispose of some assets after when you are at COD, and you can make capital gain based on that. Overall, we managed to get 10% return on equity, which means that yes, it does make sense to invest massively, as we are doing actually in the renewable activity. We will invest only as a company over the 10 years to come about $60 billion, which represents quite a large chunk of money, and more than 25% of our capex will be dedicated to renewable energy.
Thanks. Let me do a couple moderator footnotes. You all have your Stanford app for this event to submit questions, and we're going to take some of those questions that have been submitted by the end. Also, I've asked the guys to feel free to interrupt me and each other and be as conversational up here as possible, because we were having a great conversation in the green room, and I wanted to kind of capture some of that energy. I had said, well, you're both European energy companies. They both said, whoa, we're global energy companies. And right you are. Everything you do impacts the world. You know, if my first question was starting with the outcome, or if Paris starts with an outcome, here is the recipe we want cooked by this date in this order of operations. I mean, what I'm really asking about is the ingredients. And you gave us a breakdown of some of that, you know, the 50, 25, 25. You know, what does that look like for Shell? Can you also, inside your crystal ball, take the ingredients and dissect them? This is where we think we are going by sector of investment, or by energy type, or profit return center?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think very much what Ladislas said. We're masters at planning. We are well known for our scenario practice, and so we have distinct perspectives on how we will get there with respect to the volume of oil and gas, biofuels, hydrogen, renewable power, and so on. We would want or need in the mix to be able to get to our aspirations. But we also know that the world is fraught with uncertainty, and that we, as a result, need to be able to be resilient through the transition. And resilience means resilience in every potential aspect. Financial resilience, resilience of the system overall that we're building. And I'd like to highlight 2 points in that respect that I think are inherently qualities that we have learned to build over the many decades that we've been in operation, but also what is, I think, fundamentally important for the energy system we're trying to build, which is integration. Very important. And when you hear people speak about hydrogen and the relationship with renewable power and how to get it to customers, I think that's a story of integration. At scale, of course, that's what is required. And then I think Ladislas mentioned it, the importance of value chains. And it was interesting to hear Peter, who in the end admitted that he doesn't have any customers, be the first one to talk about customers. And from our perspective, whereas I think traditionally we may have been companies that were more or less focused on or looking at the world through a lens of product push and product forward, that we're now becoming much more companies of customer back. And so when we look at how to drive the transition, one thing, Alexander, that's very important for us is to be able to look along sectoral lines and say, so how can we help the customers and the end users at the end of that value chain, help them decarbonize, but making sure that along the value chain we actually create resilient system, both in terms of maybe energy balance or emissions, but also profitability. And so when we look at one thing, and I think this energy conversation is very much often around the one thing, it isn't going to be around one thing. It's your ability to integrate the various parts of the energy system into a solution that in the end cuts across the aviation value chain or the marine value chain or the power value chain in a way that makes it worthwhile to go there, invest the enormous amounts of capital we need, but also create a system that is inherently resilient from an energy efficiency and effectiveness perspective.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I like very much this importance of value chain or being integrated. And when I look at it, and by the way, we share that with Shell, so it's very easy for me to mention that. On the gas, on the LNG in particular, what's very important is to be integrated along the gas value chain. Because if you're just a gas producer, okay, this is it. And today we do see that there are differences that make that you don't know where actually you're going really on a continuous basis going to get the returns that you need, given it's a very capitalistic business. So being integrated by producing, by liquefying, by transporting, by regasifiering, then having final clients is absolutely key to the success of this industry. And basically for renewable, I would say, trying to do about the same. And replicating this kind of model of integration seems to me to be one of the recipes for success.
Yeah, it sparked a thought for me, when you talk about value chains, and you're really referring to the value chain across business applications, but can you talk to us about the value chain across people and partnerships? In other words, we're sitting at one of the great energy and sustainability institutes in the world. We're at and one of the world's great epicenters of innovation. The first rule you learn in this community is you can't do it alone. So what does that look like to collaborate? Where do you find bridges of useful scaling for your efforts or acceleration for that matter in this community or communities like it, whether it's MIT or Paris or Oxford or wherever else?
Well, let me take that somewhere else before I come back.
Sure.
And I was here 3 weeks ago, and we met with many of the people in the audience actually, and with folks from the Durr School, and we talked about potential opportunities and so on. And the next day we traveled to Seattle to see some of our partners. Yeah. Customers, partners in the technology industry. I won't name names, but the usual characters in Seattle.
If they're not based here, we don't really want to hear their names anyway.
Right. And so we've been working with these partners in the spirit of what I said earlier. Thinking about their value chains, thinking about how they serve billions of people with their data centers, and how we can help them decarbonize those data centers. And in that process, we've been able over the years and months we've been working together to find, I don't know how many different applications, from something we call immersion cooling to obviously manage heat and heat generated in the data centers to the levels needed, as well as providing 24/7, 365 renewable power for the data centers, but also to help them decarbonize their fleets. And so you come across a range of opportunities that we seem to be able to offer because of the integrated nature of our products and our businesses. And so you can see those partnerships grow reciprocally, because of course there are many products that they deliver to us to be able to deliver them the products they need more efficiently. And I think we're seeing an explosion currently in our customer-oriented business in terms of the opportunities we see and how much our customers will want to work together to achieve the COP27 and the Paris goals, because they are also very much, of course, chasing after that. Then let me take that to another place to talk about other P's and partnerships, which is with governments. And if we are ever to achieve the Paris goals, we're going to really need orchestration at scale. Many of the people earlier today mentioned the IRA, which we also think is a fantastic product of orchestration that was well needed. The Green Deal in Europe actually is much alike. And that in its own right also, I think, is a massive piece of orchestration. I think about China, where, well, orchestration tends to happen. And so working together, and Ladislas will be very familiar with this, with governments to make for that orchestration and the sort of general steer, oversight, incentives, policy, and permitting that we need to be able to put that together at scale is important on the other end. So you've got these partnerships at the customer level, and you've got these partnerships at the governmental and authority level. And in between, of course, you need to have the people that make it happen. And I always tend to think that, well, those are the people sitting here in front of us. The engineers and the innovators that you find in places like Stanford.
You're going to get mobbed by hundreds of students with business cards when you leave here. They're going to.
Very good. No, but I fully agree with what you said. That, of course, partnership. Today, it's not we are going just to decarbonize our own activities. Of course, it's a target, it's a challenge. We all have some very ambitious targets in that regard. But helping others decarbonizing their own activities is critical. And by the way, that's all this complexity of scope 3, which is the scope 1 of somebody else, etc. So it's not additive. So helping that is clearly government. Of course. I would say also internally our own people. I appreciate very much the students who want to join and very happy for them to do so. Yeah. But we have 100,000 people also working in our company, and we need to reorganize also and to rethink internally the way actually we are going to transition not only with investment, capex, but also internal organization. And for us, for instance, since September 21, we've put in place a new system called we have about 3,300 engineers working on different topics. They used to be a little bit on a silo and say, okay, now we have one tech. We call it one tech. So everybody is working now and can benefit from experience, knowledge, and get motivated in the process of this energy transition, which makes things actually very attractive for people inside the company. So you need to change the internal organization. Yeah. And I just give you one example, or the way we look at it, where we're offshore, we're very much in offshore. Okay, developing capabilities, technical capabilities on offshore wind, floating offshore wind, is something actually that we can be familiar with. We're chemical engineers, of course, in our refineries. Well, okay, developing e-fuels, combining, I don't know, H2 and CO2. These people actually, they open up and they have a possibility. We have drillers and reservoir engineers. Well, CCS is just for them because here is a new era of application that you can have. I don't know, LNG, we liquefy. Why not liquefying H2? Well, I just take that as examples to show that there are many different areas from the technical point of view where we can benefit from our competitive advantages or knowledge. Yep. In order to promote and accelerate the transition.
This is a really rich vein of discussion, so I'm gonna push on you to double click that. It's no secret, it's public knowledge that ExxonMobil's gone through a very big reorganization in recent years, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But I'm pleased to hear you say that is organically percolating inside of Total. But I want to go a little deeper on it, because I think there is a need for the big oil companies to better understand the assets in the ecosystem, and there's a better need for the public to understand big oil companies on this point. I think Darwin said it's not the strongest that survive, it's the most adaptive. And what you just said is we're adapting internally to the mission that's in front of us. How is Shell doing that? And then let's talk about, is there differentiation between having the capabilities that you organize around versus having the culture, right? And so what needs to be done adaptively internally with the culture and the thinking for the outcomes?
Well, great questions there. One thing I'd say is, we may come across as a little monolithic and and slow. I tend to think we're not so much. We've been around for a long time. Shell's been around for more than 120 years. And I think we've shown over the 120 years that we can be very adaptive. We can change. We've always been changing. And, for sure, indeed, the last 20 years, perhaps we've been changing more than we have ever done before so, and perhaps that will further accelerate. So it's not an innate quality we do not have. I think we have it. That's one thing. I think we're becoming more externally oriented. I said earlier, from a product push, we're becoming customer oriented. It's not that we are not to start with. And what people don't know is that we have 30 million customers showing up at our forecourts every day. We have 1 million industrial customers, so it's not as if we never see a customer. But I think this world is one where you need to be even more aware of what your stakeholders and customers want. And so we're reorienting to the outside. And I like your examples. We see quite a lot of examples of people within the company being actively reskilled or looking to reskill, from working in our drilling organization to being one of the drivers of the carbon capture and storage teams in our organization. We've had people who worked for years in the liquefaction part of the business who are now working indeed very, very actively on liquefying hydrogen. And so we see it really playing out in front of us every day. Does that mean there are no challenges? Absolutely. We have challenges in terms of trust and acceptability, and so that level of engagement we also need to continue to step up. But I just want to do away with this notion that we're slow and we're the old world. I don't believe that for a fact. I think we're actually very modern. And by the way, I think one other example: we work together a lot. Mm-hmm. Yes, we compete fiercely, but we also work together a lot with the different peers in our industry sort of sphere. We're working together with Total on a project in Norway to collect CO2 from a variety of different industrial complexes, then to ship it offshore and have it re-injected in the depleted field. And that's work we're doing together, both technically as well as commercially. So there's a lot of interaction. Do
you see an evolutionary trend in the culture of the workplace in general? There's no wrong answer, but what do you observe inside your own companies? In other words, the competencies are there. You're hiring some of the best engineers. You have people who can adapt their skill sets to different things. But it's a little bit like GM. It's a GM sort of question of you're born on the factory floor and you want to be the CEO and you spend 30 years there. You're in a place now where young people just want to attach themselves to the medium internally or externally, where they can apply intellectual capital for the fastest rate of return. What do you see? Because you're getting that new generation. You're getting Gen Zers. And what is happening culturally to accommodate those plans, I guess is the question.
Maybe when you look at, I see young people joining the company, they don't join for the past. They join for the future. Mm. We announced our ambition, by 2030, we'll have 100 gigawatt of gross capacity in production, and we'll be one of the top 5 worldwide player in renewables, global. That's what we want to get. It's quite exciting for young people to say, oh my goodness, these people, I have to say, they have the money, so they know what they talk about, because basically what we do is we use the cash that we get from our traditional activities to invest massively in renewables, in new molecules, in new technologies. So you have the means, you have the target, you have the ambition, and you have you track the resources. I tell you that we have no problem of having people saying, oh, I want to join, because this is a wonderful field of opportunities that you are offering us, having the resources, and we know where you're going to. And for me, what is very key in order to build trust is to say what you're going to do and to do what you said you would do. And this is and not to change your mind. So we've set some very clear targets with objectives by 2030, with the ultimate objective of net zero ambition together with society by 2050. But just there is a clear path on where we're going, and there are the investment. The investments are there. The organization is here, and the different technologies are developing.
We see the same. And by the way, the young people drive hard, and they do challenge. But I also wouldn't want us to only look at it that way. We have an incredible number of very motivated people who are a little bit older in the tooth, like myself, who are incredibly committed to help make the change. And some of the most cutting-edge parts of our organization are actually staffed by people with 25 experience in other places. And so it's going to take all of us, I think, to be able to make that.
So if the path is clear, perhaps some of the obstacles aren't. So just spend a few seconds, if you will, on greatest impediments, greatest accelerants, whether you know them or would like to have them happen. What does that look like on the path we're going? What's most in your way, or maybe you lose sleep at night because it might get in your way? What is the greatest accelerant to success? And does it exist, or is it obtainable?
One thing I would think about is I said earlier, what we're good at is innovation at scale. Mm-hmm. But innovation at scale is difficult. Mm-hmm. Innovation at the laboratory scale is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but we know what that looks like. Innovation at scale is really damn hard. We've taken 120 years to build this energy system. Now we have to rebuild it in 4 decades, maybe. Mm-hmm. That is really difficult, and you run across all the different challenges that you get in terms of mobilizing, allocating capital, which is always scarce, but also to find the level of orchestration you need to be able to sort of tramline that investment into the right places, and so I would say we need to work together in these partnerships to first and foremost create the policy structures and the mechanisms. I think that is still something where we need enormous amounts of work. And I said that I think IRA and the Green Deal, they are extremely helpful. Now we need to translate them into implementation, and that's hard. And you come across all sorts of practical problems. I think that's one thing. And then together with that, you can really run down the cost curves, provided you can execute at scale. Again, that's what we're good at. Peter Therium just now said, he gave the example of the gigafactories and the mega electrolyzers. Well, he's got the luxury of being able to do it. Mm-hmm. How can you create that or recreate it in Western Europe or in a number of the states in the US? And if you can do that, you can get the price point of hydrogen down to where you need to. You can get the price point of synthetic fuels to where you need to. And I think that, for us, at least in my mind, is amongst the biggest challenges. And that's what I lose sleep over.
Yeah.
In my view, what's the biggest challenge? Well, I think we all agree that availability, affordability, and climate cleanness is necessary. One of the big complexity is to have them at the same time, because there is no way that we're going to privilege one against the two other ones. No, it has to come together, and this is by nature challenging, and that brings me to another point, which is the timing issues of the transition. Because, of course, on the one hand, we say we want to accelerate as much as we can, we're going to have renewable, we have to forego all the rest. But this is not the reality of what happens. And by the way, today we do observe very well that, okay, you should not forego before building. And this timing issue is very difficult to tackle, I would say, because some say, okay, we need just to go for it, but the reality also is that people need energy, and people are going to need more and more energy. So it's not a question of saying, okay, let's stop that and let's focus. No, we need all energies. And in my view, they are complementary. Rather, we should not oppose. We should actually, add and develop new as fast as we can. And I think we're very good examples of how fast we can go. Would you work for the company? I can tell you, you see that it's shaken from the inside to say we have to move very fast. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we should not continue producing oil and gas as long as, of course, we can take care of the methane problem for gas and reduce emissions, and we have all these targets and develop CCS. But I mean, the thing is not black, white. It is a transition. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the perspective and proportionality. You know, most people are unaware that the 5 big brands that they know, including yours and the one I'm associated with and a few others, that are in Western democratic societies with publicly held corporations accountable to regulatory authorities and so forth, are less than 11% of global oil supply, much less than that of global energy supply. And you just mentioned what has to happen over the long run. We've got a real crisis, and my colleague Condi will discuss this, but how's winter? What are we doing from where you all sit with proximity? How much should we be more attuned in the balance between national security and natural security at this moment from where you all sit?
Well, I think it's one of the very prominent manifestations of the trilemma that Ladislas referred to. It's very hard to make choices. And so we're trying as much as we can to do both, to provide people with energy. You know, just for example, in the Netherlands, we have mobilized floating regasification units to be able to supply gas for the winter. That isn't flowing from Russia, of course. And we've been one of the anchor parties to bring one of the RFSUs in. So that's an example of us putting money to the table and our qualities and capabilities to be able to weather the winter in the Netherlands with liquefied natural gas, which we can also provide from our portfolio. What we have also said, though, is this is not going to hold us back from pushing through the transition we need to make. And that's a tough challenge, but that's what we're going to do. Are we done with the problem? No. I think we are going to see 2 or 3 very tough winters in Europe where we'll have to be able to strike that balance adequately. I think companies like us can play a major role, but it comes back to the same point I mentioned earlier. Only when we do so in unison with governments and consumers and wider society to be able to understand those choices, the role we can play, and what the associated trade-offs are that we have to live with.
And so if that's true, and Naomi's presentation, you know, sort of sets a baseline and a framework, it really points to you must decarbonize the fuel supply, you know, as opposed to just fuel switching to electrons in the near term. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, of course.
So,
I mean, no, but you have to do all of the above at the same time. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is not a silver bullet saying, oh, through renewables, we're going to solve the issue. No, we need to decarbonize fossil fuel, of course, and by the way, all these biofuels, biomethane, etc., new molecules help that very much. We need to develop CCUS, which appears to me to be a low-hanging fruit because technology is already quite mature. So we need to do it at scale. That's what really is key for. But we need to develop that. Of course, we need to diversify in our view, and that's why we say we've crossed the Rubicon by going from molecules to electrons and developing that quite as fast as possible. But bearing in mind that it's a transition, and that's where, in my view, the role of gas is still very important because gas is very valuable. It's a good complement to renewable. It pollutes half as much as coal for power generation, and this is an important point because people and often countries actually switching to gas switch from coal to gas to a very large extent. So it's not maybe ideal over the 2050, but in the meantime, actually, it helps very much. Very much the case.
And think of time frames, right? I mean, you don't take 30-40% of Europe's gas supply away overnight and then replace it the next day. If you think about the investment associated with what now needs to happen, big commitments are being made around, the increased level or volume of offshore wind that we need to build and so on. Supply chains are already stretched at the ambitions that were set before that. And if you look at the amounts of capital this requires, it's just enormous. And we know, we know in practice. We're building the biggest biofuels complex in Europe. We're building the biggest electrolyzer in Europe. We're involved, like TotalEnergies, in a number of offshore wind projects. It takes an enormous amount of capital. And we are only, to your point, together maybe 2-4% of all that gets invested.
Yeah.
And we will have to at least triple that going forward.
Do you think emissions are going up near term? I mean, and I don't mean because we're slipping on Paris. I mean, if Germany's laying back on coal, if this dislocation that we have is a dramatic rift to 50, 60 years of practice. And near term, so you got to do both at the same time. That's hard. It's hard to do one. It's hard to do the other. You're doing both at the same time. Decarbonization while bringing on more molecules in the right places as never before because global disintermediation. Are we going to see a spike? I mean, is it natural to say in the near term this dislocation creates more urgency of abatement?
I don't know what we're going to see, but my comment is
just in the
this
crystal
is
ball.
A global issue. No, but I think we focus very much on our activities, on our countries, very developed countries. I think it's important to keep in mind that energy demand is going to, in our view, more or less, that's rough figures, but increase about 1% per year over the decades to come in non-OECD countries, when it will be reduced, maybe 0.7% in OECD countries. All right, but with a net being an increase in energy demand. So we always focus as if it was exactly the same, but it's not the same. Actually, energy demand is increasing in the world, which makes actually, of course, the objective of reducing on a global basis the emissions a very challenging target. But of course, we are completely dedicated to invest, and as Harry mentioned, it's a huge amount of money to just accelerate the transition.
Yeah, it's good, honest answers. Go ahead.
Yeah, the way I would like to look at it is to say, to see absolute emissions reduce significantly in the next 5 years. And what can we expect, really? I think what we should be looking for is that we're putting in place the policies, that we're developing the technologies, that we're sort of priming the pump with enough capital to be able to do so towards the latter end of this decade and then into the 30s. That's a very difficult message to give, but I think this room is filled with people who have a very realistic perspective on what's possible, and yet they at the same time have, I think, a very ambitious perspective on what can be possible in the future. And so I think that's something we have to bear in mind. But because if you do so, then you can start looking at realistic timeframes and timelines and allocation of capital through that lens, rather than say, well, it has to happen tomorrow. I think that's going to lead to very bad decision making. And so I would urge people to think about that. And then the one other thing I would say is, a lot of people are focused very much on absolute emissions. And of course, that's very important, because every molecule of carbon that's escapes unabated is one, in essence, too many. But the way we look at the future is one where we increasingly have to reduce the carbon intensity of the products we provide. That, in the long run, is going to make for the mix we need. So is gas an important solution? Yes, absolutely, because it's lower carbon intensity than the average mix of what we're seeing today. So is gas bad? No, it's not. Certainly not at this point in time. Same for biofuels. So making sure that we actually build that portfolio and the projects that will lead there with respect to an ever decreasing carbon intensity, that's the one to measure, which is also why we've set our targets in accordance with that, rather than to say, well, let's see if next year gets any better on absolute emissions. But most of us in this room know that's going to be really difficult, isn't it?
I'm going to use a little bit of moderator prerogative and delegate you guys to use your eyes to see that small screen and to pick the question. We don't have time for all of them, but my prescription won't handle that. So.
I read the first question,
okay.
which is about the leverage we have on the market, and so how do we drive our customer to transition? And I find that's a very good question, because something which is difficult to tackle for us is that we do not control demand. And demand is absolutely key in the transition. Demand depends on regulatory activities where you say, okay, you're going to switch to electric vehicles. That's not a decision that we are making as energy companies, all right? It depends on consumer behavior. It depends on many different things. And so we don't have full control. What we can do is influence. For instance, I just give one example. We decided we would have 150,000 EV charge points by 2025. This is quite a very significant figure. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg system. You want the cars to be there, and the customer having the car wants the EV charging. Okay, we do our part and say, okay, we'll have them. And that's exactly, I think, an example that I can provide. Say, how do we work with customers, not only decarbonizing their system, but offering products that actually will be needed and hopefully sooner than later. So that's the way we do it.
We have 150,000 points already, but we have more customers. I had to do that.
Bring out the competition. I wanted a little bit of spark. Go ahead.
Let me pick up the two questions that are related. One is carbon pricing necessary and important to get to a much lower carbon energy mix? And then there's another one of how we do trade-off analysis in the context of greenhouse gas emissions and margins, if I say it broadly. And so on the first one, resounding yes. We need to price carbon. There's no doubt about it. I think we've made no secret of that. We've done so for many, many years. I think we've come to realize that it can't be one thing. So if it's a tax or different systems for different countries and maybe regions is probably the answer. Where in many places, of course, that's already the case. The problem is it isn't priced sufficiently. And where it is priced and priced sufficiently, you see movement. The fact that Norway is leading with respect to carbon capture and electrification of transport is very much because of a very high price on carbon.
Do we know their price?
I think now it's something around $70, $80
Okay.
a ton or so. Where that's on the pretty high side, but it isn't high enough generally if you want to get to the speed we need. Are you using that with respect to your own trade-off analysis in the context of investments? Absolutely. We have internal price for carbon, like I'm sure you use as well.
$100 per ton. And we use for investment when we go to our COMEX. We say, okay, we have a project. We take assumption $50 per barrel, $100 per ton. So it clarifies things. Whether it exists or not, we say, okay, we're going to rank things on taking into account the price of carbon. That, by the way, we do support. And having no price at all for external negative externalities, at the end, it makes things a little bit difficult. So I think it would speed up the transition to have a price of carbon.
Is Shell able to share its internal price? Make news here at Stanford? I don't know if it's public or not.
Well, it could sound evasive. It isn't. We use different prices for different places.
Okay.
And they are correlated with what the sort of aspirations expressed by the countries are. So what they average out to depends.
You guys want to take one more? I love how I can give you a fielder's choice. Popcorn questions.
Do you think it will be possible to transition to fully electric? Well, I think it will be very difficult because there are some places in the world where the grid is not going to be here rapidly enough. So again, it's a global issue. And so even actually in the 2050 net zero emission plan or scenario of the IEA, there is 20 to 25 million barrels of oil being produced at that horizon, which means from a pragmatic point of view, yeah, people need energy. They need, it will be probably much cheaper because at that time, and we need to get prepared for that, and we will get prepared for that. But there will be still needs. But again, don't forget these negative emissions through natural-based solutions, through CCS, that can still make the net zero work.
Yeah, the last question here is, what do you find most exciting or surprising about energy transition in your work this year? And so you may have noticed I'm Dutch, and in the Netherlands is probably where we find the most critical audience for us as a company. And I actually have been surprised at the change of sentiment in places this year, mostly on the count of demonstration. So how do you rebuild trust? I think you said it earlier, it's by actually showing that you're doing things rather than saying things. And over the last few years, we've made a number of significant commitments and investments in the Netherlands. I mentioned the biofuels complex, I mentioned the electrolyzer, offshore wind, and it's starting to catch on. People are seeing that we are actually serious and willing to commit many billions of dollars and our capabilities to making it happen. And where it first happened was with our own people. And so much of this is happening around an existing refinery site. We call it an energy and chemicals park these days. And they have conceived their own transition pathway, working very much also with the community around them to say, we're going to change this facility into something that is very different. We're going to deliver you waste heat, and we're going to produce green products. And then they started to put spades in the ground with the biofuels complex, and they now have broken ground with the electrolyzer. If you see the change in sentiment, that was the most exciting thing for me to witness, going there with investors, with people from the community. It is totally transforming. And I had not appreciated that you could do it so quickly by showing that you're serious and making those commitments. So I think that's something for the future for us to replicate.
Well, first of all, go ahead.
No. What I'm surprised by with the energy transition is that for a company, a multi-energy company like us, it's huge opportunities. And people do sometimes say, it must be difficult. No, but that's a field of opportunities where we can bring talents, technology, money, and to supply more demand, as I mentioned. So frankly, I think internally we do see it as okay, there are difficulties, there are challenges. It's not easy, but frankly, people are extremely optimistic internally when I see them and share with them with their future and so I would say opportunity is the word.
Never bet against an engineer.
Yeah. Let me say first, thank you all for reading the questions for me. Critical, and I will check the prescription. Secondly, let me thank you all for being here and being engaged partners to Stanford. I'm so proud to be affiliated with this place. And I see Jay Precourt and Tom Stevenson, Yi and Arun, and everything that's built here is about convening people for deep dialogue for problem solving. And our mentor, we were all mentored by George Shultz, who used to say, trust is the coin of the realm, and with it, anything is possible, and without it, nothing is possible. Let me just ask one last thing, because you both identified trust as a key ingredient in what you need to do about it. There's a saying that the speed of trust is what determines the ultimate success. We know what we want out of you all as collaborators, partners, places to deploy the things that are being innovated and invented here. What is it this community should be thinking about in building better bonds of trust with the industry in general and with your companies from your perspective? What does partnership look like for acceleration?
Well, first, I would say speed of trust is very important, but consistency is very important as well. You need to be consistent in what you want to achieve, share it, and for me, because this is we're here for the long run. I mean, it's going to take time. We need to a company to work together more, to be much more inclusive, but this is a path, and so consistency, in my view, is a recipe for trust.
One practical and then somewhat more philosophical. I think the practical one that I was here a few weeks ago, we spoke about the Durst School of Sustainability, and I'm particularly excited by the accelerator track and you know this sort of perspective and vision around how can we scale more effectively. I think that's fantastic. And then the more philosophical one is embrace us.
Yeah.
Embrace us and make it a bear hug, so we can't get away. And you know, also that we're very clear on what you expect from us. I asked Arun and others, what do you expect from us? Show up more, talk to us, show us what you're doing. And I think if you do that, we'll be incredibly willing to engage, to share, and honestly to work together in that partnership to do that scaling.
It's a good place to conclude our talk. Consistency, resiliency, speed, and scale. Thank you both for being here. And please thank our guest.